Podcast is not an end-all be-all thing. It's something that you do to add on to the current service you already have. So if you think that you can start a podcast and next thing you know, you get $100 million deal like Joe Rogan and Spotify, you're not going to get that. If you're looking to start a podcast to connect, to serve, to help people, and to share information, I think that's the right thing to do. All right, so back in 2020, during the pandemic, actually right in March when we had to shut down, especially in the state of New Jersey, I was kind of freaking out as a business owner and a clinician of like, how am I going to be able to A, keep my business afloat, and B, help my current patient that are not able to come see me in the clinic. I remember sitting on my couch just really trying to process everything. And during that time, I'm pretty sure I had COVID, first wave of it. And as I'm like trying to figure my way through and try to taste food and not have any taste, I was like, you know what? I have to be able to find a way to connect with my current audience and my current patient and make sure that they still staying on the same path. So obviously we integrated telehealth. And another thing we did to keep inspiring hope by sending out positive message to people is I decided to start a podcast. And this is when, podcast in 2020 was big, but it's not as big as it is now. And actually, funny stat is that Mode podcasts were started during 2020, and now majority of them, I think 80% of it is no longer are live anymore because people just stopped doing them. So anyways, I started the podcast in 2020 with the goal of connecting my current patient with my past patient and have my past patient share their story of how they overcome some of the self-doubt, limiting beliefs when it comes to their rehab. I went on Amazon, I spent 2 hours on YouTube, figure out like what equipment I need to buy, how do I go about it, how to use GarageBand, how to record an intro, how to get music where I don't have to get sued for without copyrights. I spent literally 2 to 3 hours doing that, and then I immediately just sat down, put the mic on, and started recording. I absolutely had no idea what I was doing during that time, and as I was doing it, I found myself being extremely self-conscious just because obviously you guys know English is not my first language. And as you listen to your own voice and you play it back, you just realize that, man, like, do I even know what I'm saying? Do I even know what I'm talking about? So a lot of imposter syndrome started coming back up. Nonetheless, what I said to myself was like, I'm not doing this for me. I'm really doing it to just get the message out for the patient that cannot be seen at this moment. And they're losing hope at every single minute that this podcast is not being put out. What I did then is I go through the list of patients that I had during that time, and I was like, how do I start a podcast and create the biggest impact from the first episode? I reached out to a bunch of people, and a lot of people say yes because they found it extremely exciting, and we were gonna do it over Skype. I did over Skype, not even over Zoom. I decided to have my first guest ever on my first episode of podcast being Devin McCourtney of New England Patriot. And I did that because I want to set the tone. It's my first podcast. I'm going to make a lot of mistakes, but I'm also willing to sacrifice using the highest profile athlete that I had in my pocket during that time. So I went all in, and that's the way I made the decision to go all in, because if the stakes are high for me, then I have to really put my best foot forward. I can't back up at that point. So I remember reaching out to Devin, and he was so nice, and he was like, yeah, dude, let's do it. So he was outside playing with his kids, and we were on, Skype, try to record at the same time. But clearly there were so many bugs going on. I had to end up like apologizing and then redoing it again over and over again. And I learned how to edit on the fly, like cutting things off, putting it back and forth. If you guys go back to that podcast, it sounds like 80% okay. But that was my first podcast. I did not have any help whatsoever. So since then, I decided to do a podcast almost once a week during the pandemic. And it gave me a real opportunity to connect with so many people, my past patients who are just sitting there at home and doing nothing, and really explore their lives, their story, and learn about them at depth. And they taught me so many things, especially what went through their mind, especially with big injury like ACL, UCL, and what advice they give themselves to overcome that. And I took that, I wrote down all those lessons, and then with those lessons, I was able to connect with my new patient in the clinic once we were able to get back to say, hey, what you're telling me right now, I've heard it before. Matter of fact, X, Y, and Z person I know went through it. here's a podcast you should listen to, I think you would find a lot of information that can be really helpful, for you, especially during this part of rehab. It gave a sense of community within my clinic where my patient was just coming in who are feeling lost. Clearly they have, the help of me and my team, but to hear someone that looks like them, sound like them, play the same sport, went through the same thing, and to hear their story, that really resonated with them way more than what I can tell them. It really helped us bridge the gap. And what's cool is that my past patient who was on the podcast would get messages and DM from my current patient, and they create a bond and a friendship over that, which I think, help both individuals, right? The past patient now feel like, oh my God, I have a true purpose. I went through this so I can help other people, right? And what's cool is I would get messages or people coming back to visit after they get discharged from us saying they want to be physical therapists because of the journey they went through with us. And to me, that's probably the highest compliment I can get as a PT and as a business owner, just because we did such a great job at providing exceptional care. But most importantly, we gave them an opportunity to find themselves during the care and perhaps see themselves in what we do, and then they think that they can just take what we help them and then add their own ingredient into it and then make it better for the future. So to me, that's really the highest compliment. And with the podcast, when I first started, it was all old patients hearing their stories. Then what I realized is that there were some people that I just didn't know how to help. And because I was not an expert in that sport or that position. So what I did was I reached out to some coaches that I know, whether it's my good friend Madi Williams, who is the quarterback coach, and I would reach out to him like, hey dude, can you come in the podcast? Let's talk about your holistic approach to like quarterback training, right? So for me, I'm just there to learn. And it's an opportunity for me to have undivided attention for an hour to talk to someone and learn from their perspective and their wealth of knowledge. That way I can bring it to the patient I'm currently serving right now. So I started doing that with strength coaches, CrossFit coaches, even like MDs. And I think with MDs, like one of the best episodes we had was talking about frozen shoulder. And I had an expert, Dr. Claudia Ginsberg, who came on, and she spent like almost an hour just talking about, her experience with frozen shoulder. And obviously I learned it through PT school. I have treated frozen shoulder in the past, but to hear from her point of view of how she treated really expand my thinking of, oh man, I could approach frozen shoulder completely differently using that scope, using that framework that she had. And she had 10 plus years of experience treating frozen shoulders. During that time, I was only 3 years out of school. So for me, it really helped me fast track my ability to learn and connect with people. Clearly, it's been 3 years. We still publish our podcast on a regular basis, if not on a monthly basis. And now you can see the message obviously is go from sharing people's story to gaining information. And I think now we just have a wide array of guests that are coming on our podcast. I do think that because of me making the decision to start a podcast, to reach out, to connect with people, especially within the community, that really helped my business during 2020, during the pandemic, because it kept me at the forefront of constantly getting information to help people. And my patient appreciate that, their parents appreciate that, because I'm just always looking to innovate ways to just get better. Podcast is a great vehicle for that. Again, podcast is not an end-all be-all thing. It's something that you do to add on to the current service you already have. So if you think that you can start a podcast and next thing you know, you get $100 million deal like Joe Rogan and Spotify, you're not going to get that. But if you're looking to start a podcast to connect, to serve, to help people, and to share information, I think that's the right thing to do. And for me personally, I think it's very unethical of me not to share information if I have the information, if I have the resources to help people get a better outcome in their care. Because that's what we do as physical therapists, is that we serve our patient through education and we help them overcome some of their self-doubt through, whether it's exercise or most importantly, just help them realize that they are more capable than what they think they are. If you are interested in starting a podcast, I think this is probably the best time to do so. I'm running a challenge this week. And for those who have not joined the challenge, the Share Your Voice Challenge, I'll have some recording for that. But if you're interested, check out my YouTube. I'll go over some more stuff on this and reach out, and then I'll send you some resources.